Hi friends, in today's video, I'm making 2 comfort meals that Americans have been eating since the time of the Great Depression. There are 2 reasons that these recipes are still popular today. Number 1, they're delicious recipes, and 2, these are affordable meals. Today, I'm making goulash and bread pudding. First up, I'm making goulash. I'll be making 2 versions here, one with ground beef and another with Beyond Burger. I've never used the Beyond Burger plant-based patties, and the last time I was in Aldi, they had those on sale, so I thought this would be a great time to test it out and see how I like them. Goulash is a popular American comfort food, and so as not to confuse my viewers from other countries, American goulash is not at all like Hungarian goulash. Most American goulash recipes call for beef of some kind, macaroni noodles, tomatoes, either tomato paste or tomato sauce, onions, garlic, and paprika. Some recipes include cheese. I'll be using sharp cheddar in my recipe. I'll also be using a little bit of chicken bouillon in place of chicken broth. I've reviewed several highly rated recipes, and I'm recreating my dish in a low-budget version. For the meat version that I'm making, I'll be using just over a half a pound of ground beef for 2 servings. I'll put the recipe that serves 4 in the description area of my video. If you're trying to save money on food, you can always cut the amount of hamburger meat used and it'll still turn out great. This is a perfect recipe for that. When I was cooking this dish, the delicious aroma of the spices made me realize that it's really the spices that help to make a house feel like a home. There's nothing more comforting or nurturing than the scent of a good meal cooking. And I think the best way to do that is to cook with the spices that you love the most. For me, that's definitely onion and garlic powder. I've also been using paprika a lot lately, and that reminds me I forgot to add it to this recipe. I'm using a Spanish paprika, which is basically just going to give it a smoky flavor. I added quite a bit here because we really like this, but I do recommend starting with 1 teaspoon, and you can always add more later. If you have paprika and you're not sure which kind you have, just taste it and you'll be able to tell right away. It'll either be sweet, smoky, or hot, and actually any of those would probably work well in this dish. I had some Hungarian paprika, which is hot, but I'm out of that at the moment. Otherwise, I would probably add a little bit in for some heat. Some people like to add in cayenne as well. For this version, I'm going to make it very hearty with a small amount of liquid. If you want more broth in yours, just add more chicken bouillon with water at the end. I picked up these 2 rolls of French bread this morning while I was at Sam's Club. I needed this for the bread pudding recipe. They are super fresh and I think they'll make great garlic bread to go along with my goulash. And for these, I'm just going to butter the bread and I'll add a little bit of garlic salt and just a touch of Parmesan cheese. Then I'll broil it for a few minutes. This is the kind of Parmesan that I put on my garlic bread. Looks like I didn't push record on my camera. I like to get these big canisters at Sam's Club because I love this Parmesan cheese on my popcorn. At this point, you may be noticing that some of the goulash has disappeared from my pan. My youngest son smelled the deliciousness that was permeating our home and wanted a bowl, so I only have one serving remaining in the pan. Since I was making 2 versions of this, I didn't want to make a big batch. As you might have guessed, my son loved it. If you can afford to add chopped cilantro or parsley to this dish, I definitely recommend it. It adds such a nice fresh balance to the meal. Wow, the flavor in this dish is phenomenal. If I like beef, I think I would rate this a 10, but I don't really care for the flavor of beef. You could also make this with ground turkey or ground chicken, and I think that'd be really good. If you're struggling to afford food, you can make this without tomatoes and just use the tomato sauce. You could also extend the meat by using either barley or textured vegetable protein. The wheat berries would have worked well in this dish as well. I'll leave some tips in the description area of my video. This was the first time that I tried the Sam's Club French bread, and it was really good, so soft and chewy. I'm not sure if it's extra delicious because I've been swearing off bread lately, but I really enjoyed it. I might use it to make some Italian subs for my sons. Okay, I'm really excited to try this version with the Beyond Burger. I'm not going to show this on camera because I'm basically going to be making it almost the exact same way, but I did want to show the patty, and to be honest with you, I'm a little skeptical of this. I do, however, like the fact that it's made with some pea proteins because as someone who eats a lot of soy products, I think it's a good idea to moderate that a little bit. Here is the finished version, and I made mine with more broth, and I also added a little of this togarashi powder, which is basically just red chili peppers, but it has such a wonderful flavor with a moderate amount of heat, and it gave the overall dish a really nice flavor. As for the Beyond Burger, I felt it tasted just like beef, so I wasn't really a fan, and when my oldest son tasted this, he loved it so much, he said, had I not told him that it was Beyond Burger, that he would have thought it was a beef version. And he also really enjoyed the addition of the togarashi, so it's definitely fun to experiment when you're cooking with adding different spices. And I do think next time I would love to add some green peppers and maybe some zucchini for my version. I would also like to try this with some whole foods like the barley or the wheat berries. And as far as taste wise, I think I like the Morningstar Farms products a little bit better than the Beyond Burger. I don't think I would buy this again. This recipe, however, is definitely a keeper. It's comfort food at its finest. It was so satiating and satisfying. I do hope you'll give this recipe a try because it was really good. For my next recipe, I'm making bread pudding. This recipe works in an 8x8 pan, but since I don't have that, I'll be using the smaller pan and 2 of my individual serving size dishes. And I was trying to decide which one of these I wanted to use. I think the one on the right is a little bit taller, and that'll work better for the bread pudding, so I'll be using that. If you want to double this recipe, you can do that and cook it in a larger pan. I'll be using about 3/4 of a loaf of this French bread that I talked about earlier. There are so many different variations of this recipe. This dish is made throughout the world, and each country makes theirs a little bit different. If you ever have time to check out the Wikipedia page for bread pudding, they list all the different countries and the ingredients that they use. They're all very similar, with just slight differences in the ingredients. It might be fun sometime to make a few of those variations. The kind of bread pudding that I'll be making is the one that has been popular here in the United States. However, even these recipes vary by region. In the South, in states like Louisiana, they sometimes serve it with a whiskey or a rum sauce, and it's frequently sprinkled with powdered sugar. I'll just be topping mine with either milk or oat milk. I also think you'll find that some people like theirs a little bit wetter, and some people like theirs kind of dry. I'm someone that's in the middle. I like the top to be kind of dry and then kind of moist underneath, but not super wet. I've made bread pudding with lots of different kinds of bread, and I like mine best with French bread. It adds a nice chewy texture that you can't get when you use regular bread. Usually I use stale bread, but this is fresh, so we'll see how this turns out. And I just cut them up in bite-sized squares. The same method that I'm using to make this bread pudding can also be used to make a savory bread pudding that's known as a strata, where you basically just whip together some eggs and milk along with cheese, meat, or veggies and pour it over the bread and bake it. If I have time in this video, I might show one at the end. Since bread is so inexpensive, it's a great option for my viewers that are having difficulty affording food. And even if you're not on a budget, you're going to want that recipe because it's freaking delicious. I'm using 4 whole eggs, 3/4 cup of sugar, 2 cups milk, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I don't always like cinnamon in my recipes, but I really like it in my bread pudding. I'm going to take the back of my wooden spatula just to make sure that every piece of bread is soaked with the egg mixture. It's not important to have the egg line up above the bread, but it is important to make sure that each piece of bread is soaked. I'll put a link to the original recipe for you. As written, it says to add 6 slices of bread, but if you're like me and you're using French bread, then that can be kind of confusing. I will say though, if you like a more soggy and wet bread pudding, then use less bread and maybe cook for a little less time. I like mine moist on the bottom and dry on the top, and I've made this recipe enough to know about how much I need on the bread to liquid ratio, and you'll see how mine turns out at the end. On the small one, I have a lot more liquid than bread, so I'm going to add a few more pieces of bread just to soak that up. Now I'll bake these at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. I had a little bit of the bread left over, and of course I'm not going to let this go to waste. It is past my lunchtime. I am so hungry, and I have a little of my vegetarian goulash left over, so I think what I'm going to do is make a mini casserole with this. I'll broil the bread pieces and add some garlic salt and Parmesan cheese and shred up some Tillamook extra sharp cheddar cheese. I'm basically just going to top the goulash with the bread mixture and then cover it with cheese and then broil it in my toaster oven. I decided to top it with some sliced green onions, cilantro, and a little bit of crystal hot sauce. This was so good. I was bummed that I was out of the goulash because I wanted more of this. I like this enough that I would make a goulash casserole next time because it added a nice chewiness, but you could still taste the delicious flavor of the goulash underneath. Bread is a great low-cost ingredient, so serving it this way automatically helps to cut down on the cost of the meat in the dish. Of course, I was eating mine as a vegetarian meal with a vegetarian Beyond Burger crumbles, but those products can be expensive as well. Okay, now let's get back to the bread pudding. I forgot that I wanted to try something with one of these individual servings. I wanted to add some frozen berries, but I forgot to add them in before I started cooking. So about halfway through, I added a few to the top. I wasn't sure if unsweetened berries would work, but I guess we'll find out soon enough. Here is the classic bread pudding, and after about 45 minutes, it's looking pretty good, although I think I'll let it go for another 5 minutes just to be sure. Since I like to eat mine with milk over it, I'd rather it to be a little more done than underdone. Here's how the one with the berries turned out. It looks delicious, so I'm excited to try this. Wow, even though these berries were unsweetened, they are delicious. I think I just discovered a new way to make a fruit cobbler. Normally when I make my cobbler, I use flour to make it, but using this French bread makes everything so good with a chewy texture. Plus, it makes for a super simple recipe. Here is the fully cooked regular bread pudding. It turned out perfect. I'm actually not sure which one I like better, the one with the berries or the one without. They're both very different, but I like them both equally. Probably next time I'll make a pan of half and half. It's now the next day, and I have to admit that half the pan is already gone because that's how much I love it. I love it for breakfast. I love it for dessert. Maybe next time I'll cut the sugar in half. I could add some protein powder in to make it a little more balanced. And I'm wondering about using wheat bread. If anyone's experimented with making a healthier version of bread pudding, let me know in the comments. I didn't have time to make a strata today, but I'll make one in an upcoming video. I'm already thinking of the delicious flavor combinations I'd like to make. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. If you haven't subscribed already, I hope you'll consider doing so because it does help my channel and allows me to make more of this type of content. And as a bonus, if you turn on the notifications tab, you'll receive notifications when I release a new video. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and I'll see you next week, and maybe even sooner than you think.